Hi, my name is Chris Fox, and today I want to tell you about the StratTech Revolution, or how software is eating the world and why strategy is its next meal. Software is eating the world is not something I made up. I've borrowed the quote from Mark Andreessen, who was one of the early internet entrepreneurs. He was a co-author of Mosaic and a co-founder of Netscape. And he made this rather prophetic statement as long ago as 2011, and it's come true in many different ways. Perhaps the most obvious one is Netflix. It wasn't that long ago that if you wanted to watch a film at home, you had to drive to the video store, rent a video cassette from the range that they happened to have in stock at that time and no one else had already rented out, drive home, watch the film. Remember that if you were kind, you would rewind, and take it back to the video store the next morning. But Netflix came along and changed all of that. Netflix streams the films directly from their central servers to your TV. There are no more video cassettes, there are no more video stores, there's no more need to drive to those video stores or rewind the videotape. All of those physical things have disappeared. Netflix ate the video industry. Other popular examples include Uber and Airbnb and Amazon. And they're slightly different. For example, Uber still needs physical taxis and people to drive them. But Uber doesn't own those taxis, and if they had their way, they wouldn't have to hire the drivers themselves either. All Uber does is provide the software that connects the drivers to the riders and arranges payments and things like that. And because that software can be used anywhere in the world, they've completely disrupted what used to be a very localized taxi industry and made it into a more global business. Airbnb has done something very similar. Again, it's disrupted the hotel industry, and of course we still have to have buildings for people to stay in and people to clean and maintain them. But Airbnb doesn't own or hire any of those. Again, all it provides is the software to connect people together. And of course, I think we're all familiar with how Amazon has disrupted the retail industry. Yes, of course, we still have physical shops everywhere and we still spend a lot of time and money in those physical shops. But Amazon has changed in many ways the retail industry in irreversible ways. But it's not just those sort of high-profile industry transforming aspects of the statement that I want to look at. Software has changed the world in much more mundane ways as well. For example, not long ago, if you'd walked into an office, you would have seen lots of people sitting at desks but with pens and paper. If they had technology, it would probably be a phone or maybe a typewriter. Whereas now, if you walk into an office, you'll mostly see people huddled around computer screens. Software has eaten office work. It's not just office work. If you walk into a hotel, the hotel receptionist is probably standing behind a computer terminal which connects their booking system to their check-in system, and probably also to the system that activates those little key cards that give you access to your room. The same thing happens at an airport. The check-in person is probably standing behind a computer terminal that connects their booking system to their check-in system. And in fact, with airlines, the aeroplane itself is probably flown by some sort of autopilot software for most of your flight. If you go into a restaurant, the waiter is probably going to enter your order into some software on a little tablet, which then will transmit the order directly to the kitchen for them, saving them the trip. Even in a factory, most of the more difficult or dangerous work is now done by robots, and the factory workers are standing behind computer terminals and screens, monitoring the performance of those robots and issuing instructions and reprogramming them. Even in our personal lives, most of us would probably become quite anxious if someone took our mobile phones and devices away from us. because they contain the software that we use to communicate with each other, to interact with businesses, to place orders and to buy things, to entertain ourselves, and even to distract ourselves. Software is eating the world. It's changing the way businesses work. It's creating new businesses and new industries, and it's destroying old businesses and old industries. It's changing the way businesses interact with each other to create supply chains, and it's changing the way we as people interact with each other, with businesses, and with the world. COVID has massively accelerated these changes. Before COVID, for example, to deliver this talk, I would have had to fly halfway across the world to stand in front of you and deliver it in person. It would have taken me at least 10 hours of travel time each way and cost me about £1,000. And that's before worrying about other costs like hotels. But of course, now I'm able to deliver this presentation using software. Even a seemingly simple change like this can have profound implications for businesses. If you're in the airline or hotel industries, of course, what I've said probably isn't good news. But for me, as an independent strategy consultant, it's been a little bit more mixed. When we first went into lockdown, I sat down and thought about what the implications for my own business and my own strategy would be. And one of the things that I quickly realized is that whereas in the past my business had been fairly localized because I would typically interact with my clients on a face-to-face basis, remote work suddenly meant that my business had become global. Now, of course, that opens up a lot of opportunities, like speaking at conferences like this, or dealing with clients on a more global scale. But I realized that it also meant that my competitors were now no longer just the other consultants in my local area, but in fact strategists from all around the world. And in fact, I'm pretty sure that at this conference, I'm competing for your attention with strategists from all over the world. And that caused me to realize that I had to both change and up my game. And hopefully you've realized what that means for your business as well, and perhaps that's why you've come to this conference in the first place. But that brings me back to how software is going to eat strategy. There are two different types of consequences for strategy. The first is the challenges and opportunities that this presents, and how these will inform the strategies we're developing and executing. We want our businesses to be amongst the ones that are disrupting our industries and benefiting from these changes. We don't want to be the ones being disrupted. Now, in a sense, that's nothing new. We've always used frameworks like this PESTLE analysis here to identify the opportunities and threats from our environment and understand the implications for the strategies we're developing and executing. And this idea that software is eating the world falls into the technological dimension in this framework. And perhaps it means that we need to pay more attention to software and the trends in software. And perhaps it means that more businesses need to start thinking more like software companies. But that's not what I want to talk about today. Instead, I want to talk about how software will change, is changing, the way in which we do strategy, our processes for developing and executing strategies. And to do that, I want to talk about bookkeeping for a moment. I want to talk about bookkeeping because it's something that every business has to do, regardless of what sector you're in, so we can all relate to it, and because it provides a near perfect analogy for what I want to talk about. I'm old enough, sadly, that I learned old-fashioned double-entry bookkeeping at school. Now, we had specially printed ledger pages and journals where we had to write in transaction records by hand, twice, as is implied by the name double-entry bookkeeping. And the way it worked was that when you got to the bottom of the page, you added all the numbers up, wrote the total at the bottom of the page, turned the page over, wrote the total at the top of the next page again, and carried on. And then when you got to the end of the process, say at the end of the month or the end of the year, you added up all your totals and you transferred those onto the balance sheet and income statement. And if you got it right, your balance sheet balanced. Now, schoolboy exercises were usually simple enough, but you can imagine that as your organization gets bigger, this becomes much more complicated very quickly. So you would have teams of bookkeepers, and you'd have to divide them into sub-teams who would all work independently. And then at the end of the process, you'd have to add all their work together in a process we called consolidation in order to translate the final results onto your balance sheet and income statement. So it became quite an undertaking. Now, by the time I reached the workforce, of course, all of this had been taken over by computers. And the first computers really just more or less replicated what we'd been doing on paper. So you still had bookkeepers, but instead of entering the transactions into journals and ledgers manually, they would type them into computer systems. And of course, the computer system could add up the numbers much more quickly and much more accurately and transfer all the answers from the original accounts into the balance sheet and income statement much more effectively than the bookkeepers could ever have done manually. So there was a huge improvement there already. But of course, they soon realized that if you could connect your accounting system to the computer systems which were starting to take over other areas of the business, you could put the transactions straight from the source systems into your bookkeeping systems, cutting out the bookkeepers as the middlemen. So if you were a shop, you could connect your electronic cash register system to your accounting system. Or if you were a factory, you could connect your ERP system to your accounting system. You could connect your human resources and payroll systems, your invoicing systems. All of these systems, you could connect to your accounting system so that they could input the transactions directly from system to system without needing the bookkeeper sitting in the middle. And before long, there was very little left for the bookkeepers to do. But of course, that doesn't mean that we don't have accountants in our businesses anymore. We still have probably just as many accountants in our businesses. But because they are now free of the sort of mundane, repetitive tasks of bookkeeping, they're free to focus on the much more value-adding tasks like financial analysis or planning. And software invariably does that, by the way. It starts off being quite simple and really just replicating what you used to do with pen and paper before you had the software. And sometimes in those early stages, it can seem like more trouble than it's worth. But gradually, it gets cleverer and cleverer, automating more of the routine activities more quickly and more accurately, until you can't imagine how you ever did things without it. And that's where I want to come back to the subject of strategy. Now, most of the businesses I know do already use software for their strategy development and execution processes. Unfortunately, the software they use is Microsoft Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. Or maybe they use the equivalent software from Google or someone else, but it's still basically office productivity software. It's software that has been designed to write documents or deliver presentations. It's not software that has been developed to help you think and act more strategically, the way that accounting software has been developed to help you manage your finances better, or CRM software has been developed to help you manage your customer relationships better. It's software that's completely agnostic and ignorant of what you're trying to achieve, and so it never gets any better at it. It never provides us with any better support. In fact, I realized about 10 years ago that we were basically still doing strategy exactly the same way as we've been doing it 10 years previously. If you have some data, then you put it into Excel, and that lets you create a table or maybe a graph. And then you copy that into Word or PowerPoint and you add some words or other tables or graphs or images until you have a strategy document that you think looks convincing. In fact, a lot of people I know prefer to use PowerPoint rather than Word for their strategy documents, simply because it's easier to make the documents look pretty in PowerPoint than it is in Word. And I'm sorry, but if our main criteria for choosing software for doing strategy in a world where software is eating the world is how easy it is to make the documents look pretty, then we're probably in trouble. We need software that will help us to develop better strategies, that will help us execute them more effectively, software that will help us think and act more strategically. We need software that does more than simply change blank pieces of paper on our desktops into blank pixels on our screen. Of course, you can download strategy templates from the internet into Word or PowerPoint, but that's really the equivalent of having pre-printed ledger and journal pages in your accounting books. It still leaves you with the equivalent of having to figure out how double-entry bookkeeping works. Still leaves you having to add up the numbers each time and transfer them into the balance sheet and income statement at the end of every month. Now, the statistics show how many strategies ever get successfully executed, and they're not pretty. I've seen studies suggest that as many as 90 to 98% of all strategies are never implemented. That's terrible, but at least our documents look pretty. Now, we have to be able to do better than that. I'm not suggesting that better software is the whole solution, but I am suggesting that it must be part of it. In fact, I've seen many larger organizations as well, which have strategy teams who seem to spend most of their time copying information from one office document to another, getting the latest updated figures from marketing for finance, updating their tables in Excel, regenerating the charts, copying them into new PowerPoint slides, selecting which slides need to go to the next committee, making sure they've got the latest versions of everything before they send it out. That's really the equivalent of getting your accountants to do basic double-entry bookkeeping. It leaves them with very little time to do any of the value-adding activity that will help us to think and act more strategically. When software eats the world, we see many benefits. Firstly, we see improved standardization, accuracy, consistency, and speed. And secondly, we free people up to do more value-added and more personally fulfilling activities. To get those same benefits in strategy, we need to start solving two problems. The first are the foundations, and the second is responsiveness. Now, one of the advantages that the accountants have had is that the Italian mathematician Luca Pacioli defined the rules of double-entry bookkeeping as long ago as 1494. He didn't invent them, mind. They'd probably existed for several hundred years before that. But he did write them down and codify them. And by and large, people have stuck to them ever since. Not only have they stuck to them, but they've used them as a foundation for developing a substantial body of accounting standards. And it's this well-established foundation that has made it easier for accounting to be eaten by software and to enjoy the benefits this has brought. In contrast, business strategy only really emerged as a discipline in the mid to late 1900s, and it's far from simple, standardized, structured, or rigorous. I think us strategists actually make it worse. We seem to be constantly coming up with new theories and models. Half the time, I think we're just coming up with new words to describe the same old things, trying to make ourselves sound cleverer, more value-adding and higher priced perhaps, but not necessarily moving us closer towards a better solution. The result is that no two strategies ever look the same. They're structured differently. They use different terminology. They're written to sound clever. But at least they look pretty. But in doing so, they sacrifice consistency, clarity, and utility. In fact, a lot of what I see is just plain waffle. Sadly, people seem to have come to accept this, and the dismal results it delivers. So the first problem we need to solve is to strip strategy back to its bones, to get to its fundamental building blocks, to strip back the waffle, to express ourselves more clearly, simply, and consistently. And maybe that means stripping this back to finding the fundamental ways to answer basic questions like, where do we want to go? Where are we now? How will we get there? Why is this the best and right approach? And is it working as expected? I don't know if that's exactly the right answer, but it certainly seems like a good starting point for systemizing and improving the way we do strategy. What are standard ways of answering those questions, of representing the answers to those questions, and the relationships between those answers that can be consistent from one strategy to the next, and therefore that can be built into software solutions which will ultimately help us to think and act more strategically? There are people working on this. StratML, or Strategy Markup Language, is one attempt to define the basic building blocks of strategy in a machine processable manner. It's an ISO standard. That's the International Standards Organization. It's ISO 17469-1. So that's a good starting point. It's still early days. It needs a lot more work and it needs a lot more support. But it is a starting point and it provides a foundation that we can build on. So that's the first problem, sorting out the foundation. What's then the problem with responsiveness? Socrates is one of the greatest and most well-known philosophers of all time, but he never wrote anything down. Everything we know of him, we know through the writings of others, mostly his student Plato. We don't know why he didn't write anything down, of course. Whatever reason he had, he never wrote down. Maybe he couldn't even read and write. So we can only speculate from what others have written about him. And here's at least what some people believe. Socrates knew that his ideas were continually evolving as he learned more. He knew that if he wrote them down, he would freeze them in time. They would stop evolving. I saw one commentator describe it as the idea that writing ideas down kills them. That may be a little melodramatic. But this is often a problem with strategy. We do an annual retreat, and after that we write down our strategy, whatever we think it is, in whatever structure we think and whatever document we think is right, but at least it looks pretty, and that goes on file, and then we spend a year trying to execute it. And then we have another strategy retreat, at which we all secretly wonder what went wrong last time and why it's going to be better this time. Now, I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't have strategy retreats anymore. They are an important part of the process, but they can't be the whole process. You see, the problem is that the world pays no attention to our planning processes. It just does its own thing. So you can have your strategy retreat and think you've got it all figured out in February, and then COVID can come along in March, and the world starts going into lockdown. All of a sudden, your February strategy document starts to look a bit questionable. Your strategy document froze your strategy in time. Going back to the melodramatic, it killed your strategy. In the real world, uncertainty abounds. The world is fluid, it's constantly changing. The notion of a document is ill-suited to this. Documents are fine for documenting historic events, but they're not particularly good for thinking and acting strategically in the present and in an unknown and unknowable future. Software systems, on the other hand, are much more dynamic. Now, it used to be that accountants would consolidate and publish their accounts only once a year, and usually about 3 months after the year had ended, because it took so much work to pull everything together. But because of the improvements in accounting software, we're now getting to the point where we have near real-time access to our accounting information, where everything is always up to date all of the time. Now, we need computer systems to help us achieve the same in strategy, so that our strategies can respond much more rapidly to changes in our environments, with less need to do lots of manually intensive and error-prone work to figure it out. We need software that can help us sense and respond more quickly and effectively, not software that does nothing more than make our documents look pretty. So, if we map the answers to our fundamental questions into a software system, and if we connect these answers to each other in meaningful and dynamic ways, then we can deal with change in a much more responsive way. If where we are now changes unexpectedly, we can quickly determine what that means for, is this the best and right approach? Where do we want to go? And how will we get there? Similarly, if we found our strategy is not working as expected, we're not getting the outcomes we anticipated, we can more quickly analyze the reasons why and make compensatory adjustments. Software can help us to more quickly and accurately adjust and disseminate our plans in the same way that accounting systems can help us to more quickly and accurately reconsolidate our accounts and update our balance sheets. Systems can also log and audit changes. They can help us make sense of the chaos of change. And we can start to apply more advanced computing power like artificial intelligence and machine learning to help us to spot patterns and identify anomalies and speed our responses. And now, here is the good news. There are solutions out there already. StratNavApp.com is one of the first and probably the most complete solutions available. It's an end-to-end software platform for collaborative business strategy development and execution. Now, I confess I may be a little biased. If you remember right at the beginning of this video, I mentioned that I'm the founder of StratNavApp.com. But I use it in my own strategy consulting practice, so I know it works. It's delivered as a software as a service, so there are no downloads and installations to worry about. You can be developing and executing better strategies more effectively within minutes. It's really easy to use, and it's packed with tools, tips, and help to guide you on your journey. So, whether you're a consultant like me, or an executive decision maker, or whether you run your own business, I would like to encourage you to try it right now. We have free and paid plans available, so there's nothing to hold you back. I'm going to suggest that you pause this video in a moment. When I do, you can enter the URL https://www.stratnavapp.com into your browser, or you can scan the QR code with your phone and create your account right away. It'll only take a minute. Then you can feel free to play around with it for a while. But when you're done, please come back to this video, because I have a few more important things to tell you. So hit pause now, sign up now, and I'll be waiting for you right here when you're done. Right, welcome back. As I mentioned, I have a few more important things to tell you. Firstly, that big red text there is to remind you to tell you that we're running a special offer just for this conference. So from the 23rd to the 26th of June 2022, you can sign up to our premium plan and only pay half price for the first 3 months. And our premium plans only cost $14 per person per month. So at half price, they're an absolute steal, and the premium plans give you access to loads of extra features and benefits. But that offer will end at midnight, Universal Time, on the 26th. And Universal Time is probably different to your local time, so don't leave it to the last moment, or you may miss out. To upgrade to the premium plan, simply sign up or log into the system and click on your email address or name where it appears on the top left-hand corner. Then click Upgrade on the drop-down menu and follow the instructions. Feel free to pause this video again to do that right now. Lastly, if you want to continue this conversation, and believe me, I'd love nothing more than to do that, here are lots of other ways you can reach me, so please take your pick. Whether you've got a question, a comment, or want to disagree or add something, or just chat, whatever it is, drop me a line, because I'd love to hear from you. If you choose to connect on LinkedIn, please remember to say that you found me through this conference. Otherwise, your message might get lost in the noise. Feel free to pause the video now and make a note of any of those details, or just go ahead and connect with me right away. I want to finish with one final thought for you. I want to tell you the reason I get so wound up about business strategy. It's really simple. Businesses that think and act more strategically are better placed to bring newer and better products and services to market more quickly, perhaps more cheaply, and with less impact on the environment. And like you, I may be a consumer, a beneficiary of those products and services. So, very simply, better strategy leads to a better world for all of us. And that is something to get excited about. Please don't disappoint me. Get out there and think and act more strategically, and use tools like stratnavapp.com to help you do so. Thanks for listening, and enjoy the rest of the conference.